Ted Glick has devoted 44 years of his life to the progressive social change movement. After a year of student activism as a sophomore at Grinnell College in Iowa, he left college in 1969 to work full-time against the Vietnam War. As a Selective Service draft resistor, he spent 11 months in prison. In 1973, he co-founded the National Committee to Impeach Nixon and worked as a national coordinator on grassroots street action around the country, keeping the heat on Nixon until his August 1974 resignation. For the past 8 years, he has played a national leadership role in the effort to stabilize the climate and for a clean energy revolution. He was a co-founder in 2004 of the Climate Crisis Coalition, and in 2005 coordinated the USA Join the World effort leading up to December 3rd actions during the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Montreal. In May of 2006, he became the national coordinator of the U.S. Climate Energy Council and is currently National Policy Director for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. For 3.5 months, in the fall of 2007, he ate no solid food as part of a climate emergency fast focused on getting Congress to pass strong climate legislation. Since the mid-70s, he has been actively involved in community organizing efforts around environmental, tenants' rights, community development, and racial justice issues in Brooklyn, New York, and northern New Jersey. On a national scale, he has been a leader in coalition building and independent politics. From 1995 to 2005, he was the national coordinator of the Independent Progressive Politics Network, with which he continues to work, and he is the chair of the Essex-Passaic County Green Party. He has participated in and led hundreds of protests and has been arrested 17 times for acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, including 6 times between October 2006 and April 2011 on climate change. Ted Glick joins us to discuss 2 major events which are scheduled to take place in Washington, D.C. and Dallas, Texas. Welcome to the show, Mr. Glick.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
First off, global warming and climate change. Is there a significant difference between the 2 terms?
They're pretty much describing the same thing. The problem with using the phrase global warming, one problem is that warming gives the impression of a very benign process, and in some ways that's been true, but it's increasingly less and less true, as we have seen this year in particular, with all of the extreme weather events, the droughts, the superstorm Sandy, flooding, etc. So warming, it's really more than warming. It's also the case that in some particular parts of the world, this process of heating up the atmosphere, which is of course what we're doing, will lead to not necessarily warmer temperatures all the time. It could lead to, in some cases, colder temperatures as weather patterns change. So that's why increasingly many people who work on this issue, who study it, use the phrase climate change or actually climate disruption. I think if there's the most accurate description of what we're doing really is climate disruption. That's what's happening as a result primarily of the burning of fossil fuels.
According to recent polls, a growing number of people in the U.S. and abroad are starting to believe that climate change poses a serious threat to the planet and our future. But you have just as many people that are skeptical. Even people within the scientific community can't seem to agree on this issue. This being the case, what would you cite as irrefutable proof that climate disruption is real?
Well, it actually isn't true that there's a big debate within the scientific community, the scientific community of scientists who study this issue. There's really virtually no debate that global warming, climate change is happening, number one, and secondly, that the primary reason why it's happening is because of human activity. Again, essentially the burning of fossil fuels as well as the cutting down and destruction of forests. So it's really not a debate within the scientific community. It's about as close to a consensus as you can get.
Well, I'm sorry, are you speaking globally? Because that's what I'm referring to.
Globally. Yes, globally.
I've read some reports from Sweden to France, and they're saying that there's no such thing. So I'm kind of confused. That's why I'm raising this question.
Well, there's an organization called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that's been in existence since 1989. That's put out, I believe it's maybe they're about to put out their fifth report on the state of the science. And this, in addition to all the scientists who make up this, those are the ones who do the primary work, the research and the peer review, interaction, etc. There's also all of the world's governments that want to can also participate in it, so that when they put out these reports, it's actually not coming just from all the scientists who are part of this. There's a couple thousand of them who have been determined as the group of scientists who, taken as a whole, have the most knowledge of this issue. It's not just the scientists, it's actually also the world's governments, including even governments that essentially deny or come close to denying that it's much of a problem. And despite those realities, these reports have gotten more and more dire. Each one puts forward the evidence for how the Earth is without question heating up, and that without question the primary driver of that, almost without any doubt at all, in terms of this IPCC group, is human activity. So, it's just not the case that there's a big scientific debate about it. There just isn't. And in terms of why that, to me, the easiest thing and the most clear way for people to get it on this issue is to look at the amount of carbon dioxide, which is the primary greenhouse gas that's heating up the Earth. There's others, but that's the primary one. Look at the amount of carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere now compared to past periods of time in history. Right now, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is around 394 parts per million. Before the Industrial Revolution, when we really, as a species, began to burn coal and then oil and gas, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for at least 700,000 years. We have the actual scientific records for that in the ice cores that are taken from the Arctic and the Antarctic. For 700,000 years, that CO2 level had not gone above 300 parts per million, and it generally was more around 280 parts per million for most of those 700,000 years. And there's other scientific information, theory to the effect that we're talking millions of years, that the Earth's atmosphere has not been above 300 parts per million. It's now, as I said, up to 394 parts per million, and it's going up at least 2 parts per million, sometimes 2.5 parts per million every year. It's increasing at a rate that is just incredible, and that, again, has not been seen on Earth for at least 700,000 years, almost certainly millions of years.
A few months ago, you published a powerful article on your website about how you and your wife survived Hurricane Sandy. Despite the unprecedented level of destruction throughout the Northeast and other areas, many people living in the country still don't believe climate disruption was responsible for creating Hurricane Sandy. Having lived through it and witnessed the destruction firsthand, what would you say to the critics?
The thing about Hurricane Sandy, which turned into Superstorm Sandy as it kept coming up the East Coast, was that it did something that I have never seen or don't remember ever seeing, and I saw meteorologists on the Weather Channel saying the same thing. It took virtually like a 90-degree left turn once it got up to New York and then along the New Jersey coast. Hurricanes don't do that. Hurricanes go out to sea as they come up the East Coast. That is the historic pattern for I don't know how long. I've never heard about, and again, meteorologists, on the Weather Channel who know about this more than I do said the same thing. That was unprecedented. And so in my little research into why that happened, the reason that happened was because you have new weather patterns with the jet stream here in the United States. And the reason for that is because of the melting of ice in the Arctic. There's been this huge loss of ice in the Arctic, particularly over the last 40 or 50 years. 50% of the ice, looking at it from the sky, from the top, is gone compared to 40, 50 years ago. And if you talk about the volume, the actual amount of ice, it's more like 75% of that ice is gone. We're talking about, like each summer, if you compare each summer or if you compare each winter, that's the way it is. So what that has meant is that there's been a change in weather patterns and a change in the jet stream, so that much more frequently now there's this huge dip in the jet stream, and it just kind of plummets all the way down, like, say, to Florida from, say, like in the area of Michigan, something like that. There's like this huge dip, and then it comes back up again. And essentially, as this hurricane is coming up from the Caribbean, it gets in the middle of one of these huge dips. And so that on the right side, there's like this wall. There's this wall of the right side of the jet stream that it can't punch through. And so instead, it gets forced, essentially, it goes where the path of least resistance, which was to this incredible 90-degree turn to the left into the coast. That was the primary thing, as I tried to learn about it, that was different about this, and that made this very much a climate change-related storm. There's also the reality that the ocean temperature was much higher off the coast of New Jersey than it ordinarily is. And again, that certainly can be ascribed almost certainly to the fact that last year, 2012, was the hottest year on record in the continental United States, the lower 48. So, again, if people look into it and do the research, it's pretty clear Sandy, as well as many of these other extreme weather events, are very much related to what's happening with our climate and the heating up of the atmosphere.
What are the two major events taking place in Washington, D.C. and Dallas this month?
On February 17th, the Sierra Club and 350.org and the Hip Hop Caucus and about 100 other organizations, including groups like the Nebraska Farmers Union and the League of Women Voters and Physicians for Social Responsibility and so on, are having what will be the largest demonstration on the climate issue in the United States. It won't be the biggest in the world. There actually were about 100,000 people who demonstrated in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2009 during a big United Nations climate conference. But this will be the biggest one in the U.S. based upon the people who have already registered. There'll be tens of thousands of people there. And it's happening on President's Day weekend, and not by coincidence. The primary focus, kind of the target of the demonstration, is President Obama. When he gave his inaugural speech, many of us were very pleased to hear him talk with more substance about this issue of the climate crisis than he basically has almost ever done, certainly since he was running for president in 2008, where he talked about it somewhat more than he did during his first 4 years. So the target is President Obama, calling upon him to take those words and translate them into the kind of action that we need to really drive this shift away from coal and oil and gas to the clean, non-polluting, and jobs-creating energy sources, wind and solar in particular, also geothermal, energy from the tides, from the currents, clean sources that are good for the environment, not destructive to it. That's one general demand of the demonstration. The other is that he reject, finally, once and for all, the tar sands pipeline, the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. That is an export pipeline, by the way. This is not a pipeline for U.S. consumption of tar sands oil, which is the dirtiest and most polluting form of oil in the world. This is an export type pipeline so that the Canadian company TransCanada can make more money by mining and selling this very dirty oil. So that's the demonstration February 17th in D.C. And then about 2 weeks later in Dallas, Texas, kind of in the heart of the oil and gas industry, there's a national conference with people from around the country who are coming as part of a coalition called Stop the Frack Attack, which had a demonstration against the process of fracking and hydraulic fracturing to get gas out of shale rock way down underneath the ground. That's a practice that has been developing over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's very destructive, both for the climate and for people who live close to the wells. There was a demonstration by this grouping of about 5,000 people in Washington, D.C. at the end of July last year, and coming out of that demonstration, the momentum from it, the connections that were built, this is a national conference of the movement against fracking to strengthen our work and to make plans for how to keep building our movement more strongly in the coming months and years.
If people want to get involved or take part in these events, who should they contact for details or information?
For the February 17th demonstration, there's a website, www.forwardonclimate.org. And for the Dallas conference, the first weekend in March, it's Stop the Frack Attack, F-R-A-C-K, stopthefrackattack.org. And if people go to those websites, they can get lots of information.
And how can people contact you or read the critically acclaimed articles you've written on climate change/disruption?
I have a website, which is tedglick.com. So I can be contacted there, and my email is there if people want to ask me questions or respond to what I said.
In closing, is there anything else that you'd like to say to the public regarding this issue?
Yes, I would. I made a decision towards the end of 2003, just about 10 years ago. I was doing other work at the time. I was doing organizing work, but I really was not focused on this issue of the climate crisis. I knew that the Earth was heating up. I knew about that, and I knew that over a period of time would be a problem. But I didn't really see it as that serious an issue until the heat wave in Western Europe that took place that summer, the summer of 2003, which led to 30 to 35,000 people dying. And that was my wake-up call. That led me to study this issue for several months. I read a number of books about the subject, and I became convinced that not just was this more serious than I thought, but it was actually much more imminent and here than I had thought. And that led me to decide that I needed to take this up and do all I could to contribute to building the kind of a movement that could eventually lead to solutions. So it's been almost 10 years. There's been absolutely nothing that has happened since that has made me regret that decision. If anything, the much more rapid acceleration of the process of the Earth heating up and the extreme weather events, all that has been happening has made me feel more and more that I was really right, and has made me feel more and more the urgency of this issue. The fact is that other issues, in my opinion, none of them are more important. There's no issue more important than this one, because if we don't change course, we are talking about the kind of destabilization of human society and really life on Earth as we know it. There's huge numbers of species that are already dying off, going extinct, and many more will. There'll be tremendous disruption on a world scale, massive migration movements of climate refugees flooded out or needing to leave because of drought is destroying their ability to grow food. I mean, we're talking about major disruption to the entire world and world civilization in this century. We can already begin to see some of the impacts of it here and there. So I would urge people, whatever your current view of this issue, look into it, do the research, do the study, take it seriously, because if we want to leave a world for our children and our grandchildren and our descendants that is a world where they can live with some hope of a decent life, a decent future, we have to solve this, and very soon.
Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Glick.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the G-Man. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.